Hi, welcome to Feed Your Soul. I am Melinda, and this is a series on the Torah portions. The Torah portions are a way to divide up the first five books of the Bible to read them over the course of a year. We are a few months into this. We're in the book of Exodus right now. Uh, my channel, Feed Your Soul, is a space for people to come and be fed by the Word of God. This study specifically is for followers of Jesus to understand their Bible better. We need to know the front of the book so we can understand more fully the back of the book, right? Jesus or Yeshua, his teachings are all built upon this foundation of the word of God that was breathed out and written down by Moses and then even the prophets, right, through the rest of the Old Testament. These these words are what our faith is built upon. And most Christians don't know them as well as they should, right? We know the stories. We know about creation and the flood and about Joseph going to Egypt. And we know the stories that we heard in Sunday school, but do we know the text as well as we should? That's my challenge to you. Dive in deep with us, read through the entire first five books line by line and learn something new about your creator and your place in his kingdom. Okay, this week we are on truma. That is the Hebrew word for something like contribution or offering. It's a type of offering. Really, this like free will gift comes from the word to kind of lift up. And it's all about bringing gifts and offerings to have enough material to build the tabernacle where God's presence is going to dwell. We're looking at Exodus chapter 25 through 27:19, 1 Kings chapter 5 and a part of chapter 6, and then Hebrews chapter 9, the first part, verses 1 through 10. Before we start reading, I just want to ask if you are new here, or even if you're not, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment, share this. If you get to the end and you enjoy this video, please share it. Just that's how this little channel can grow. It's just my love for the scriptures, and I want to share it with others. And the only way it really grows is if others interact and share it. If you're looking for more about really holistic wellness, you can find me at Nourish Body, Mind, and Soul. It's nourish-bodymindsoul.com. And I do holistic health consultations. Consultation is not really the right word because I walk along with people and just help them be well, step by step. And what I found more and more as I'm working with clients is that there is no dividing up what we need to do for our bodies or what we need to do for our minds or what we even need to do for our souls or spirits. We are all such interconnected beings that what I'm seeing is my clients that I help them get well through nutrition also need a place to go to really feed their souls. And so that's where this channel came from. And I'm happy to be able to serve my clients, my family, and friends in this way. So if you need someone to walk alongside you, you just don't know what's going on, you've been through the regular medical system and yet you need some more assistance, get in touch. I'm a nurse, I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner as well. And educating people on how to be holistically well is my passion. So, all right, let's get into the word. Exodus 25, verse 1. Yehovah said to Moses, "Speak to the people of Israel, that they take from me a contribution from every man whose heart moves him. You shall receive the contribution for me. And this is the contribution that you shall receive from them: gold, silver, and bronze, blue and purple and scarlet yarns, and fine twined linen, goat's hair and tanned ram skins, goat skins." I have question marks there because if you're reading it, you might have there's a ton of different translations of this Hebrew word. Some come from like sea creatures. It's an unknown, really, animal. We're not sure what it is. What does your version say? If it says something other than goat skins, put it in the comments. Okay, so bringing the different skins, acacia wood, oil for the lamps, spices for the anointing oil, and for the fragrant incense, onyx stones and stones for setting, for the ephod and for the breastplate. And let them make me a sanctuary or a mikdash, um, from the word kadosh, right? For set apart, holy. So make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst, exactly as I show you concerning the pattern of the tabernacle. There's a pattern, right? Or the mishkan, meaning to dwell in Hebrew, and all of its furniture. So you shall make it. They shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2 cubits and a half shall be its length, a cubit and a half its breadth, and a cubit and a half its height. You shall overlay it with pure gold, inside and outside you shall overlay it, and you shall make on it a molding of gold around it. You shall cast 4 rings of gold for it and put them on its 4 feet, 2 rings on the one side and 2 on the other. And you shall make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. And you shall put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark to carry the ark by them. The poles shall remain in the rings of the ark, they shall not be taken from it. And you shall put into the ark the testimony that I shall give to you. Verse 17, you shall make we're going to go with covering right now. It's not mercy seat, even though that's what most of our translations say. So we'll talk about that in a moment. You shall make a covering of pure gold. 2 cubits and a half shall be its length, a cubit and a half its breadth. And you shall make 2 cherubim or cherubim in Hebrew of gold. Of hammered work you shall make them on the 2 ends of the covering. Make 1 cherub on one end and 1 cherub on the other. Of one piece with the covering shall you make the cherubim on its 2 ends. The cherubim shall spread their wings above, overshadowing the covering with their wings, their faces to one another toward the covering. Shall the faces of the cherubim be. And you shall put the covering on top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony that I shall give you. There I will meet with you from above the covering, from between the 2 cherubim that are on the ark of the testimony. I will speak with you about all that I will give you in commandment for the people of Israel. Okay, so we're going to pause because there was a lot just in those first few verses in that chapter. First, I just want to talk about the very first word in this section, the very first verse in this section. Yehovah said to Moses, speak to the people of Israel that they take for me a contribution, teruma, from every man whose heart moves him. You shall receive the contribution for me. This is pretty significant, and we're going to talk about this again with the pairing in First Kings. This was not mandated. Everything that was given for the making of this tabernacle was voluntary. And in fact, we'll see a few chapters ahead in another portion that they had too much, and they had to say, stop bringing these precious things. We have too many. So just to keep it in mind, this was a voluntary contribution, and you could give as little or as much as you felt, or nothing, right? It was whose heart, whatever your heart moved you to bring. And then I want to just talk about this word mercy seat. I had always wondered where this word came from because it's not what it says in Hebrew. It is kaperet. If you know any Hebrew at all, you probably know that the word kaperet is related to Kippur or Yom Kippurim, like atonement, Day of Atonements. That word really does kind of mean covering, to cover over, like to cover over sins, right? Atonement is a pretty big idea, pretty big theme, especially as we get into the rest of Exodus and Leviticus. So this space, this covering for the ark is from the Hebrew word meaning to cover, but also used in covering, like cover your sin, right? Atone for. It is really from this same root word as Keperet. So mercy seat doesn't make any sense really, um, linguistically. And so I was curious as to where it came from because it's in almost every translation. What does your translation say? Put it in the comments because I'm curious if anybody has anything besides mercy seat. And let's see how many of our translations say mercy seat. Say what your translation says and what your translation is. Um, but I found out that it was Martin Luther who coined this phrase in German when he did his German translation of the Bible. And he just kind of used his own literary creativity. He kind of made up this word, mercy seat. And so we find it all through the Old Testament in many of our English translations and also in the New Testament because of Martin Luther. Um, yeah. And then also the Ark here, just a little aside, when we get to this week's helpful Hebrew videos, which that's a whole nother playlist, we'll talk about this stuff a little bit more, but the Ark, the Hebrew word for that is Aaron. And I was super curious if that connected anyway with the name Aaron, and it doesn't. So check out helpful Hebrew that I'll get to probably in a couple weeks on this chapter, different origins for each word. Um, just so you know. And this ark, Aron, is not the same Hebrew word for ark in Noah's Ark. They're two completely different words. We use the same English word. Aron means like a container. It's actually the same word used for the coffin that Joseph was buried in as well. It just means container. And cherubim is the Hebrew word for our English cherubim, and it is kind of a mysterious word. We don't have a word origin really for it. The Hebrew Jewish literature says that it comes from an Aramaic word for childlike, and that's probably why depictions of um, cherubs look so baby-like, is because of that. I can't imagine they're like children. It's got to feel like there's another connection here. I saw someone connect it to like an ushering in. Um, and then it made me think of Jesus talking about we need to be like children. And I just wonder if there's a connection. This is just me pondering, but keruvim or keruv is what it is in Hebrew. Okay, back to Exodus 25. Verse 23, you shall make a table of acacia wood. 2 cubits shall be its length, a cubit its breadth, and a cubit and a half its height. You shall overlay it with pure gold and make a molding of gold around it. And you shall make a rim around it, a handbreadth wide, and a molding of gold around the rim. And you shall make for it 4 rings of gold and fasten the rings to the 4 corners at its 4 legs. Close to the frame, the rings shall lie as holders for the poles to carry the table. You shall make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold, and the table shall be carried with these. And you shall make its plates and dishes for incense, and its flagons and bowls with which to pour the drink offerings, and you shall make them of pure gold. And you shall set out the bread of the presence, or showbread, depending on your translation, on the table before me regularly. And you shall make a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand shall be made of hammered work. Its base, its stem, its cups, its calyxes, and its flower shall be of one piece with it. And there shall be 6 branches going out of its side, 3 branches of the lampstand out of one side and 3 of the other. 3 cups made like almond blossoms, each with calyx and flower on one branch, and 3 cups like almond blossoms, each with calyx and flower on the other branch. So for the 6 branches going out of the lampstand. And the lampstand itself, on the lampstand itself, there shall be 4 cups made like almond blossoms with their calyxes and flowers, and a calyx of one piece with it under each pair of the 6 branches going out from the lampstand. Their calyx and their branches shall be of one piece with it, the whole of it a single piece of hammered work of pure gold. You shall make 7 lamps for it, and the lamps shall be set up so as to give light on the space in front of it. Its tongs and their trays shall be of pure gold. It shall be made with all these utensils out of a talent of pure gold, and see that you make them after the pattern for them, which is being shown to you on the mountain. So remember, this is all preset by God. There's a pattern here, right? There's a pattern that is being shown to Moses. And we'll read later in Hebrews that this pattern is really after the heavenly tabernacle, that this is all just a type and shadow of the heavenly space that is where God's presence is, right? So the light, what can we say about light? There's a ton actually that people will say about the different furnishings of the tabernacle. Why 3 cups of almond blossom? This is probably not super accurate to the text here, but more, first of all, it's very big. Um, the menorah in the tabernacle, it's very big. It's 7 branches. Many people tend to be familiar with the 9-branch menorah. That's actually a Hanukkah. It's just for Hanukkah. The 7 branch is the one that was found in the tabernacle and later in the temple. And really, what it's to give light. That's really what its main purpose is to give light. And then there's a whole lot of in-depth, symbolic teachings out there about what the menorah represents. And so I'll let you find them on your own because there's a ton of them and we don't have time for it here. But if you know of any really interesting takes on the 7 branches, are they meant as symbols? What do you think? Okay, Exodus 26. Moreover, you shall make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twined linen and blue and purple and scarlet yarns. You shall make them with cherubim skillfully worked into them. The length of each curtain shall be 28 cubits, the breadth of each 4 cubits, and all the curtains shall be the same size. 5 curtains shall be coupled to one another, and the other 5 curtains shall be coupled to one another. And you shall make loops of blue on the edge of the outermost curtain in the first set. Likewise, you shall make loops on the edge of the outermost curtain in the second set. 50 loops you shall make on the one curtain, and 50 you shall make on the edge of the curtain that is in the second set. The loops shall be opposite one another, and you shall make 50 clasps of gold. The couple the curtains one to another with the clasps, so that the tabernacle may be a single whole. You shall make the curtains of goat's hair for a tent over the tabernacle. 11 curtains you shall make. The length of each curtain shall be 30 cubits, and the breadth of each curtain 4 cubits. The 11 curtains shall be the same size, and you shall couple 5 curtains by themselves and 6 curtains by themselves. And the 6th curtain you shall double over at the front of the tent. You shall make 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is outermost in one set, and 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is outermost in the second set. You shall make 50 clasps of bronze and put the clasps into the loops and couple the tent together that it may be a single whole. And the part that remains of the curtain of the tent, the half the curtain that remains, shall hang over the back of the tabernacle. And the extra that remains in the length of the curtains, the cubit on one side and the cubit on the other, shall hang over the sides of the tabernacle on this side and that side to cover it. And you shall make for the tent a covering of tanned ram skins and a covering of goat skins on top. You shall make upright frames for the tabernacle of acacia wood. 10 cubits shall be the length of a frame, and a cubit and a half the breadth of each frame. There shall be 2 tenons in each frame for fitting together. So shall you do for all the frame of the tabernacle. You shall make the frames for the tabernacle, 20 frames for the south side, and 40 bases of silver you shall make under the 20 frames. 2 bases under one frame for its tenons, and 2 bases under the next frame for its 2 tenons. And for the second side of the tabernacle on the north side, 20 frames, and there are 40 bases of silver. 2 bases under one frame and 2 under the next frame. And for the rear of the tabernacle, westward, you shall make 6 frames, and you shall make 2 frames for the corner of the tabernacle in the rear, and they shall be separate beneath, but joined at the top at the first ring. Thus shall it be with both of them. They shall form the two corners. There shall be 8 frames with their bases of silver, 16 bases, 2 bases under one frame, 2 under another. You shall make bars of acacia wood, 5 for the frames on one side of the tabernacle, and 5 for the frames of the other side, and 5 bars for the frames on the side of the tabernacle at the rear westward. The middle bar, halfway up the frames, shall run from end to end, and you shall overlay the frames with gold, and you shall make rings of gold for the holders of the bars, and you shall overlay the bars with gold, and you shall erect the tabernacle according to the plan for it that you were shown on the mountain. And you shall make a veil of blue and purple and scarlet yarns in fine twined linen. It shall be made with cherubim skillfully worked into it. And you shall hang it on 4 pillars of acacia, overlaid with gold, with hooks of gold, on 4 bases of silver. You shall hang the veil from the clasps and bring the ark of the testimony in there within the veil. And the veil shall separate for you the holy place from the Holy of Holies, or the Kadesh HaKadeshim. Um, so it's like Holy of Holies, or the most holy place. It is very holy. It's how you would say that, the holiest of holies in Hebrew. You shall put the cover on the Ark of the Testimony in the Holy of Holies. And you shall set the table outside the veil, and the lamps stand on the south side of the tabernacle opposite to the table, and you shall put the table on the north side. You shall make a screen for the entrance of the tent of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen embroidered with needlework. And you shall make for the screen 5 pillars of acacia and overlay them with gold. Their hooks shall be of gold, and you shall cast 5 bases of bronze for them. Okay, that was a lot, wasn't it? Um, so there was a lot of directions given for how to put this tabernacle together, and some of the different pieces that go inside the tabernacle. It honestly, for me, it's hard for me to picture any of this. So I so appreciate the internet, and being able to look around for different pictures of what the different elements may have looked like. And people just really do the best job they can do, really rendering the illustrations. I even saw one person come up with a round version of the tabernacle, which is an interesting theory, taking these measurements. That's for another time. Um, Fascinating, though. One thing I want to talk about here is how there are cherubim woven into the different aspects of the tabernacle. Here, I feel like these layers are out of order in this picture. I think the one with the cherubim on it was closest to the bottom, like the layers that protected the outside of the tabernacle. But I just wanted you to kind of get the idea of, there's this overlay on top that contains cherubim. So they are overlaid on the outside of the tabernacle. They're on the curtain that separates the outer courts, the holy place, from the holy of holies, right? And so the cherubim are there, and then they're also on the ark, the cover, um, the atonement cover of the Ark of the Covenant, right? And they're are there. And we don't know exactly what they look like. This source has them as having like 4 legs, being more animalistic. And other, you'll see cherubims made to look like babies even. But the same Hebrew word was used to describe the figures that were sent to guard the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve had to leave, right? Cherubim were sent with flaming swords to guard the way back into the garden, so that Adam and Eve would not have access to the tree of life. Um, After they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it was like a dangerous and a bad thing to be able to eat from the tree of life in that state. God had to separate himself, separate them from the garden. And these cherubim seem to be something having to do with the presence of God. right? And keeping people in their right position when the presence of God is near to us. Something protective, I would bet if I was a betting person that cherubim surround God and his glory in heaven. Um, and it's just a fascinating thought. Like, what are these? I don't think they're these baby-like chubby figures like we see in our modern day depictions of them. I think they're just this type of heavenly being, right? That surround the glory of God, and their job is to somehow manage the presence of God, especially when humans are involved, coming close. So interesting. Do you have thoughts on the cherubim? Um, any teachings that you've seen that are interesting? I'd love to hear about them. So if you would share that with me in the comments. All right. Exodus 27, we have some more things being made, the elements in the tabernacle. So stick with me. Um, we have some interesting stuff to talk about. Okay. 27, verse 1. You shall make the altar of acacia wood, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits broad. The altar shall be square, and its height shall be 3 cubits. And you shall make horns for it on its 4 corners. The horns shall be of one piece, and you shall overlay it with bronze. You shall make pots for it to receive the ashes, like below it, right? And shovels and basins and forks and fire pans. You shall make all its utensils of bronze. You shall also make for it a grating network of bronze, and you shall, on the net, you shall make 4 bronze rings at its corners. And you shall set it under the ledge of the altar so that the net extends halfway down the altar. And you shall make poles for the altar, poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with bronze. And the poles shall be put through the rings, so that the poles are on the sides of the altar when it is carried. You shall make it hollow with boards. As it has been shown to you on the mountain, so shall it be made. You shall make the court of the tabernacle. On the south side, the court shall have hangings of fine twined linen, 100 cubits long for one side. Its 20 pillars and their 20 bases shall be bronze, and the hooks of the pillars and their fillets shall be of silver. And likewise for its length, on the north side, there shall be hangings 100 cubits long, and its pillars 20 and their bases 20 of bronze. But the hooks of the pillars and their fillets be of silver. I had to look up fillets to make sure it wasn't fillet. Apparently, fillet or fillet, maybe I'm even saying it wrong, are these strips of fabric. Um, and for the breadth of the court on the west side, there shall be hangings for 50 cubits with 10 pillars and 10 bases. And the breadth of the court on the front to the east shall be 50 cubits. The hangings for the one side of the gate shall be 15 cubits with their 3 pillars and 3 bases. On the other side, the hangings shall be 15 cubits with their 3 pillars and 3 bases. For the gate of the court, there shall be a screen 20 cubits long of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen embroidered with needlework. It shall have 4 pillars and with them 4 bases. All the pillars around the court shall be filleted with silver. Their hooks shall be of silver and their bases bronze. The length of the court shall be 100 cubits, the breadth 50, the height 5 cubits, with hangings of fine twined linen and bases of bronze. All the utensils of the tabernacle for every use, and all its pegs, and all the pegs of the court shall be of bronze. Lots of descriptions here. Depending on the way your brain works, you might start to check out with all the dimensions and the cubits and these measurements that aren't modern ones, right? You can look it up online and find like approximate measurements to like our modern day measurements, but that's not my passion. So I'm glad other people do these things. But here's just a quick visual because I like to see these things rather than read about them to see what they may have looked like. Um, Made of either overlaid with gold or made of bronze. There seems to be something in the physics here. It's really important, and we'll see it in the next portion as well. Like it's really important what the space where God's presence is going to dwell, and the person who comes close to him, it's important like what garments they're wearing or what metals are used and in what fashion. It seems to be something's different here, right? Here's another rendition of the tabernacle to be able to peek inside where the furnishings might be. It's super interesting to just kind of peek at it, look inside. Yeah, the altar, the sacrificial altar would be like right down here. They don't have a picture of that here, but it was a structure that it was not just a tent, right? It was something more than a tent here, clearly, but it was made to be able to be moved, and it moved with Israel throughout the 40 years in the wilderness. And then it was set up in the space for a long time, for hundreds of years before Solomon made the temple, right? It really it lasted a really long time. Um, and it was beautifully made. And there is something different that we'll see, like with the presence of God kind of came to people through angels, through messengers. And now here, this presence of God is going to be with the people, with Israel in a different way than it ever has been before. And this was an interesting theory or thought that I saw in a couple places. Um, about the face of the Mishkan. And if you can just see kind of quickly here that if you kind of squint a little bit, you can see like there's like eyes, a nose, and a mouth. And the top part would be like the brain there, where the the Holy of Holies is, right? That's where God's presence would be. So like the brain. And then you have the menorah and the table with the showbread, and that's clearly things for seeing, right? The menorah gives light to see. And what do you see? You see the table, the showbread, the bread of the presence. And then you have the altar of incense, which is like the fragrance, where and it's in the place where the nose would be located. And then you have the the altar and where you the animals would be sacrificed, right? A lot of us get a little tripped up over the sacrifices, and if you can just remember, like, remember this altar is where the mouth is, right? The sacrificial system is really like this meal, this meal with the Father, this meal of community and relationship. And if we, most of us, most people who are watching this, eat meat, right? And so the amount of animals that actually have to be slaughtered every single day to keep up with how much meat our country or even just our town eats is quite a lot. And so if we can just remember that, that yes, this is bloody, and it is a symbolic way, you know, it's symbolic. These animals are giving their life for this uh, table, this to be in community with God, right? That that's all important, but think of it as a meal, right? Think of it as just having a meal of relationship with our Father. And that's what the feasts are, you know. So think about it because some instructions, some commandments later on, really, if you can think about what is appropriate for the table of God, for his table, it helps kind of put some commandments into perspective. But anyway, I thought this was kind of an interesting thought. The face of the Mishkan, was it done like this on purpose? There's so many mysteries that we won't understand about the tabernacle and God's intentions for it until we see him, until we can ask the angels ourselves, right? Like I will ask. That was the top of my list of questions, like what was going on. Find it fascinating. I do just want to remind you all, remind myself too, that this was all just instructions. This wasn't built yet. We will see in a few chapters that actually when it's actually being built, it'll feel a little repetitive because we'll get a lot of the same language, but that's when it's actually being built. Right here, it's just being the instructions are being given to Moses. He received the contribution, the offering, and he got the plans. And the next step will be to build the tabernacle. But before we hear about that next portion, we will see all about the priests and the garments and the and what that entails. So there'll be a lot of details about that. But let's look at another space where God inhabited inhabited. Um, and we're going to kind of compare and contrast the two. So this is First Kings from chapters 5 and 6, First Kings 5:12. And Jehovah gave Solomon wisdom as he promised him. And there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. King Solomon drafted forced labor out of Israel, and the draft numbered 30,000 men. And he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. They would be a month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. Adoniram was in charge of the draft. Solomon also had 70,000 burden bearers and 80,000 stone cutters in the hill country, besides Solomon's 3,300 chief officers who were over the work, who had charge of the people who carried on the work. At the king's command, they quarried out great costly stones in order to lay the foundation of the house with dressed stones. So Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders and the men of Gebel did the cutting and prepared the timber and the stone to build the house. Chapter 6, in the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which was the second month, he began to build the house of Jehovah. The house that King Solomon built for Jehovah was 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. The vestibule in front of the nave of the house was 20 cubits long, equal to the width of the house, and 10 cubits deep in front of the house. And he made for the house windows with recessed frames. He also built a structure against the wall of the house, running around the walls of the house, both the nave and the inner sanctuary. He made side chambers all around. The lowest story was 5 cubits broad. The middle one was 6 cubits broad, and the third was 7 cubits broad. For around the house, the outside of the house, he made offsets on the wall in order that the supporting beams would not be inserted to the walls of the house. When the house was built, it was with stone prepared at the quarry, so that neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron was heard in the house while it was being built. The entrance for the lowest story was on the south side of the house, and one went up by stairs to the middle story, and one from the middle story to the third. He built the house and finished it, and he made the ceiling of the house of beams and planks of cedar. He built the structure against the whole house, 5 cubits high, and it was joined to the house with timbers of cedar. Now the word of the Lord came to Solomon concerning this house that you are building. If you walk in my statutes and obey my rules and keep all of my commandments and walk in them, then I will establish my word with you, which I spoke to David, your father, and I will dwell among the children of Israel, and I will not forsake my people, Israel. So, Solomon's temple. So I believe, if I was reading it correctly, it is attached to Solomon's house, his palace, I believe. Was this temple God's idea, or was it David's and then Solomon's? If you read through, David wanted to build it. God said no, that he was a man of war. It would not be his hands that built the temple. If you read through Jubilees, as we've talked about before, check out some of the older portions to see how we've gone through the book of Jubilees, which is an extra biblical book that has fascinating backstory to Genesis and the beginning of Exodus. And in there, we see that I believe it was Jacob, one of the patriarchs, wanted to just got a vision of what was going to happen in the future and was like, I want to build you a house right now. And God was like, no, it's not going to be on you. That was for Moses. And then here, apparently, it's for Solomon. But there aren't specific directions that we see given for the temple, for Solomon's temple, as we did for the tabernacle. It appears that I have a slide. It appears that inside Solomon's temple is kind of like a mini tabernacle, right? If we look, it's over here. And this temple size comparison is fascinating to me. We have Solomon's temple here in like the orange. Here is the tabernacle in like the brown there, and to see the comparison of the size, right? And then it has in green there. If you can't read the text, it's an American football field for size comparison, and I find it this whole the thing really interesting. So really, Solomon's temple fit the tabernacle kind of inside, and he did his kind of own take on what the tabernacle maybe what he thought was an upgrade. Anyway, you can also see here Herod's temple, that would have been the one around in Yeshua's time, and then Ezekiel's temple, which we'll talk more about next week, which is the future prophetic, and to just note the size. And I don't know if these are correct. I am taking this person's work at their, I'm taking them at their word, but it's fascinating. But to just talk about what the differences between these two things, this one that was like could collapse and go wherever God's people went, right? The tabernacle, and then this other building that was with all of this cut stone, right? And so just a reminder that God had said that people could even have their own personal altars. Um, the altars could be made to God, like it happened over and over again through the Bible. We see Abraham making an altar. We even know Cain and Abel brought sacrifices, right? And there probably have needed to be an altar for that. All through the Bible so far, we see altars being built. The directive was that they were never cut stone, and the thought behind that is that if you're cutting stone, like that's an act of violence and war and bloodshed. And what we're using is the rocks found in the earth, like the ones that God created, and building an altar that way. And like, what a difference between this ornate um, space that Solomon built, full of quarried stone, is what he said. He said that there was no hammer or chisel heard inside the temple, so he had them deal with the stone at the quarry, so that maybe this was his way of honoring that. That he didn't bring any of those tools into the house of God, but it certainly wasn't all uncut stone like God had directed. And then the other issue I see with Solomon's temple is that it was forced labor, right? We were told just in this portion that God asked for free will offerings of people, that they had the choice if they were going to participate in building the tabernacle. But Solomon drafted forced labor of 30,000 men, and then he had a whole bunch of others doing other work. I mean, there were hundreds of thousands of people involved in this building of this very ornate uh, temple. And people were drafted, and so they didn't have a choice. And I find that hard to reconcile, that that's the way God meant it to be. But here, another thing, right? God didn't mean for the people to have a king. Even so if you read through, I guess it's First and Second Samuel, uh, the people had Samuel, the people had prophets, the people had judges, but they wanted a king like the other nations. And God didn't want that for them, because God knows what happens with a king. Each king has their issues and has to fight pride and the love of money and the love of women. And like, if you go through all of the king's issues, even the good, righteous king, still, there must have been a struggle, right? A temptation that didn't need to be there. God was their king, and he wanted to be their only king, with a prophet to be his voice. But the people demanded a king, and that's where King Saul came into the picture. So if God didn't want there to be a king, I'm not sure his original intentions were for his tabernacle, his sanctuary, to be one of like an earthly castle, right? Palace. So it's just interesting. He allowed it. He even said he would bless it and be there and show up in his presence if Solomon would follow him and keep the commandments, that he would be in the midst of Israel. So God did agree, but it seems like it was like his second best instead of his first intention for the plan. And again, here's that schematics. It's pretty cool. I find it really fascinating to look at the different sizes there. And we'll talk more about this next week in the next portion. Okay, on to the New Testament portion. I actually added Hebrews 8 here. I think my original slide said just Hebrews 9, but there was a little more backstory I wanted to capture in Hebrews. So it's Hebrews 8 and the beginning of 9. Um, Hebrews 8, verse 1. The point of what we are saying is this: we do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, and who ministers in the sanctuary and the true tabernacle set up by the Lord, not by man. Since every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices, it was necessary for this one also to have something to offer. Now, if he, Yeshua, Jesus, were on earth, he would not be a priest, since there already exists a priesthood who would offer gifts according to the law. The place where they serve is a copy and a shadow of what is in heaven. This is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown to you on the mountain. This is the Berean Study Bible, and just to note, this next section is going to quote Jeremiah 31. I'm using this Berean Study Bible and also the Berean Literal Bible because it does a good job noting some discrepancies and some thoughts about the English to the Greek. So um, just to know where I'm going here. In verse 6. Now, however, Jesus has received a much more excellent ministry. Just as the covenant he mediates is better and founded on better promises. For if that first covenant had been without fault, no place would have been sought for a second. But God found fault with the people and said, Behold, in Jeremiah 31. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their fathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they did not abide by my covenant, and I disregarded them, declares Jehovah, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and inscribe them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will each teach his neighbor or his brother, saying, Know the Lord, because they will know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will forgive their iniquities and remember their sin no more. By speaking of a new, just as new, there's no word covenant there. So let's not infer that we're talking about the new covenant here. We may be switching ideas. So, verse 13, by speaking of a new, he has made the first one obsolete. And what is obsolete and aging will soon disappear. So, the Berean Study Bible notes here that literally it just says new here, and in Hebrews 9:1 and verse 18. uh, New covenant is included for clarity, but it's not contained in the Greek. A broader interpretation could include priesthood or tabernacle. So by speaking of a new priesthood, he had made the first one obsolete. Or by speaking of the new tabernacle, he has made the first one obsolete. And it will soon disappear. So it's just interesting to know that that word covenant was added, and also here in 9:1. Now, the first had regulations for worship and also an earthly sanctuary. A tabernacle was prepared. In its first room were the lampstand and the table and the consecrated bread. This was called the holy place. Behind the second curtain was a room called the most holy place, containing the golden altar of incense and the gold covered Ark of the Covenant. Inside the ark were the golden jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. Just there, this is a little bit of inconsistency here, because inside of the um, ark were only supposed to be, according to 1 Kings 8:9, inside of it were just the tablets, just the tablets of the testimony. And so there's some Greek to English stuff here. It could just be with, right? So not inside the ark, but with or along with the ark. It doesn't have to be in. And that could just be a grammatical issue. Either way, at this point in time, when the author of Hebrews is writing, the ark is missing along with the Aaron's staff that we'll hear about later, and also the jar of manna that we hear about later. They're all missing at this point in time. So it's just kind of grouping them all together. But it doesn't have to be an inconsistency, because people smarter than me have said that this inside the ark could also just be with the ark. So if you were wondering. So with the ark were the gold jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. Above the ark were the cherubim of glory overshadowing the covering, the atonement covering. But we cannot discuss those things in detail now. When everything had been prepared this way, the priests entered regularly into the first room to perform their sacred duties, but only the high priest entered the second room, and then only once a year, and never without blood, which he offered for himself and for the sins of the people that they had committed in ignorance. By this arrangement, the Holy Spirit was showing that the way into the most holy place had not yet been disclosed, as long as the first tabernacle was still standing. It is an illustration. That word there, that Greek word, is the same word for parable. So it is a picture, it's a story, it is a symbol for the present time, because the gifts and sacrifices being offered were unable to cleanse. Many versions say cleanse. The word there in Greek is like telos, to make perfect the end goal. So the gifts and sacrifices made in the tabernacle were unable to make you perfect, to make the conscience of the worshiper perfect. Um, they consisted only in food and drink and special washings, external regulations imposed until the time of reform. We're going to pick up the rest of Hebrews 9 next week. Let me just go back for a moment, because the book of Hebrews is hard to understand. It really is. And if you don't know Leviticus and Exodus, if you don't know if you don't know the Torah, the whole 5 books, well, you're going to have a really hard time understanding Hebrews and what Paul is trying to say. I think we get our own skewed kind of Christianese versions of what we want Hebrews to say, and then we kind of superimpose that backwards on the Old Testament, when it really should be the other way around. What was the readers, the intended audience of Hebrews, what were their understanding of the priesthood, of the tabernacle, of what was being done in the tabernacle, of the sacrifices, right? What were their understanding? And that's what this study really is about, is to carefully read through, pull on the threads, the whole foundation of what these books are based on, right? Because there was a priesthood, there was a tabernacle, there was a high priest, there were sacrifices. And so what did all these things as a whole mean for us? And to understand Yeshua and who he is and what he came to fulfill and what his role is now today, it takes understanding the front of the book better, so that we can understand who he is as our high priest and what he's doing for us. And then to also, just be able to pick apart the language, because there are things that are figurative spoken about our Messiah, right? He is the Lamb of God. He's not actually a lamb. He isn't a lamb physically, but we use that language to understand something about who he is, right? We talk, Yeshua is the bread of heaven. He even talks about himself in relationship to the wine and the bread at Passover. And so what does that mean? He's not literally wine and bread. That's not literally his body and his blood, but so what are all of these, this language, these metaphors teaching us about who he is? we need to understand the foundation that these metaphors really came from. And the Passover lamb, as John calls Yeshua, the lamb who takes away the sins of the world. Well, actually, the Passover lamb doesn't take away sin. The Passover lamb, if you had watched a few portions back, it is about protection from wrath, the wrath of God. Um, so other offerings, other sacrifices are related to sin. So we just need to be careful that we don't just like assume things into and read our own biases into the scriptures. And that's my heart here, is to really help people and myself really be able to pull apart and weed through what the language, what this beautiful symbolic figurative language is teaching us, and then to figure out what is the actual literal meaning of the words. So thanks for sticking with me through a really challenging portion where there's so much technical uh, jargon, right? And we'll get a little of that in the next portion as well, as it's all about the priests and the priestly garments. So check out that next portion as well. And if you're watching this on Sabbath, I am playing a little bit of catch up. So these two videos will hopefully come out the same day, but Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful rest, and remember to keep Israel and hostages and all of the suffering in prayer. Um, and wishing you and your family shalom, shalom on this Shabbat. All right. Have a great weekend and a great week, and I'll see you next time.